1881, there was a massive Missouri River flood that was, I don't know, now you would probably call it a 500-year flood or whatever, but anyway, it was so devastating that it actually changed the channel.
That's right.
Actually changed the channel of the Missouri River. So if you've ever wondered why Carter Lake is on the other side of the river, that was that flood that did it. And so obviously there was no FEMA, there was no SBA, there were no state programs, federal, that kind of thing to help people who were affected by the flood. So a lot of devastation, loss of life, loss of businesses, loss of homes, stagnant water, disease, et cetera, et cetera. So enter a young pastor, again, Reverend J.G. Lemon, who had actually been an attorney and had worked as an attorney for, 7 or so years, and then changed careers to become a pastor, had been in Illinois at a church, and then took a call to become the pastor of the First Baptist Church in Council-Bluffs in 1881. He saw the devastation. He was very disturbed by it, actually preached a couple of sermons at his church of people who had succumbed to the effects of the flood, and worked with talked to the business community to say, we need to do something to help these people. So we fast forward to November of 1882, and he preached a sermon on temperance, just FYI, and then told, which has nothing to do with the story, but I just think it's interesting. And anyway, that was reported in the Nonpareil, thank you. And he then told all of his parishioners at the end of the service to sit down, and told them that he was going to take a collection, wanted them to contribute to the needs of the suffering people. So they collected over $20, which in 1882 was quite a sum. And the church then opened their doors starting at 7 in the morning until 10 in the evening to become sort of a clearinghouse for goods in and goods out. So farmers might bring truckloads of food, or someone might bring furniture or supplies, whatever, and people who needed it could come and get it. I often say that we would not be here were it not for the daily Nonpareil, because at that time there was a young, I call him Eager Beaver, reporter who was writing multiple stories about what the First Baptist Church was doing to try to help the flood victims. And I think without those stories, I'm not sure that we would be here today, because about a month after this effort started, on 2 days before Christmas, on December 23rd, 1882, the pastor was in his office at church, and he got a knock on the door from a man who was obviously inebriated. He had lost his job, he had lost his wife recently, and he had 3 little girls. And so he told the pastor, "You need to take my little girls, I'm not fit to raise them." Pastor, not argued, but tried to convince him, no, I'll give you money, I'll give you supplies, the girls belong with you. No, if you give me money, I'll spend it on drink. If you don't take my children, I will put them in the poorhouse. So the pastor and his wife reluctantly agreed to take the little girls. He said, I have my own children, I don't have any capacity to care for them, but he agreed to take them. The word spread, and more children came. He rented a house at his own expense and hired a matron at his own expense to take care of these children. And 3 months later, in March of 1883, he, of course, being an attorney, was able to draw up incorporation papers and incorporated the Council-Bluffs Home of the Friendless, which, of course, sounds really mean, but that was, as you may know, that was a common term that was given to organizations at the time who helped people in need. And so it sounds very mean right now, but and then 11 years later, we were reincorporated as the Christian Home, which was a name that we kept until the late 1980s, when we added the name Children's Square, but the Christian Home is still part of our legal name. And so for 90 years, we became an orphanage. And the pastor and his wife literally probably shortened their lives by dedicating all of their personal resources, which had been a tidy sum. He had been an attorney and had been somewhat well off, and all of that went into the care of the children and just trying to provide facilities for them. And I will send you with one of these books. This actually was written by the great-grandson of the original Reverend Lemon. For the first 90 years, we were headed, as our CEO or executive director, the title changed over the years, by a direct descendant of Reverend Lemon. And the last one who was Lemon to head us up, actually wrote this book. It's a very easy read, but it's a very complete story of how we began. And so we became an orphanage, and we took children from the orphan trains. We took children from police. We took children whose parents, mothers incarcerated, fathers dead, et cetera, et cetera. We also took children who were here for a short period of time, and I have a very good friend in town. You may know him, Dr. Ted Huff, whose father was actually here as a little boy in the 1920s. And the reason for that is because his father's mother was trying to take care of her mother, who had tuberculosis. The father had left them, and so she was alone with her little boy. Her mother had tuberculosis. She had to care for her mother, so she brought her little boy here and didn't surrender him to be adopted, but just brought him here where he was clothed and fed and housed and educated. And then after her mother recovered, or was on the road to recovery from tuberculosis, she went to Jenny Edmondson Hospital to get nurses training so that she could support the two of them, and then 5 years later came back and picked up her little boy. And that happened frequently, especially during the Depression, when you maybe had 7 children and you had a farm to run, and maybe 3 of them you just they weren't able to help with the farm chores, so you brought them here for a period of time, and then you came back and got them. Very different from the system that we have now, but yet kind of neat in a way, because it lets families kind of get their act together, whether financially or emotionally, whatever, and then come back and get their children knowing that they've been cared for. So we're an orphanage. In the 1960s, we started seeing that the children were arriving with different needs and abusive situations, substance abuse, but all kinds of abusive situations. And so by the late 1960s, early 1970s, when the country kind of decided as a whole that maybe orphanages weren't the best way of caring for our children in need, we ceased to be an orphanage and became more focused on individualized care. Which Jonathan will talk about in a little bit. I think by mid-70s, most orphanages in the country were either just quit, or they morphed into more individualized care, as we did. In the late 1980s, our name was added, became Children's Square Christian Home Children's Square, to focus on the fact that we dealt only with children, and then and to broaden our outreach a little bit. And so now we are a multi-service campus for children, and we say and families, because it doesn't really do any good to work with the child, heal the child, and then not also work with the family to help them. It's no point in sending a child who's had recovery and go back into a dysfunctional family. So we oftentimes say children and families. And so here we are, 141 years later, still an independent organization, not backed up by any national organizations such as Alzheimer's or Salvation Army, which is a wonderful thing. It also makes it hard in terms of fundraising. But the Council-Bluffs community, I cannot say, and the Southwest Iowa community really, I cannot say enough in terms of the support that they have given us. We would not be here without it. Through thick and thin, they have rallied and have stuck with us. And I will just say one other thing. We also had a printing press in the very early days of Children's Square, and Pastor Lemon would send out a newsletter every week or every 2 weeks, I believe, and we literally were known nationwide and had contributions. I remember looking in one 10-day period of contributions. I was teasing Phil and Gail, saying we better get with it here. In 10 days, we had contributions from 34 states. In the early 1930s, and it might have been $1, it might have been 50 cents, it might have been $5, but those newsletters helped to really expand people's knowledge at the time of who we were and what we were doing. So very, very faith-based, very, very children who were adopted. The adopted parents had to basically show that they were Christians in good standing, that they would, raise a child in a Christian home, certain values and so forth. So, but here we are, as I said, 141 years later, and so
great story.
That's,
It really is.